Welcome to Malice and Mystery. Deep beneath the sands of Egypt, where the whispers of pharaohs echo through millennia, lie chambers shrouded in darkness. For centuries, these tombs have guarded secrets more terrifying than any cursed secrets that defy explanation. Tonight, we descend into the abyss, where gold and shadows dance, and the line between history and horror blurs. This is the story of the dark secrets of ancient Egyptian tombs. Prologue: The Whispering Sands. The western desert stretched endlessly, a sea of sand beneath the pale, watchful eye of a crescent moon. The wind, a mournful chorus, swept across the dunes, carrying echoes of civilizations long devoured by time. For millennia, the desert had been a silent keeper of secrets, its shifting sands burying cities, temples, and the restless dead. Yet tonight, under the moon's cold, unyielding stare, the desert stirred. Something ancient, something hidden, was about to be revealed or unleashed. Dr. Eleanor Voss stood at the edge of the newly uncovered tomb, her headlamp casting a fragile beam into the abyss. The darkness beyond seemed alive, pressing against the light as if to smother it. Her hands, steady but tingling with anticipation, brushed over the hieroglyphs etched into the stone lintel. They were unfamiliar, their forms twisted and deliberate, as though carved in defiance of memory. They spoke of a ruler whose name had been purged from history, a pharaoh who had dared to defy the divine and paid the ultimate price, a king whose very existence had been erased until now. Dr. Vossamir's voice was a whisper, barely audible over the wind's hollow lament. He stood a few steps behind her, clutching a weathered leather journal. Its pages, yellowed and brittle, bore the frantic writings of a man who had vanished over a century ago, consumed by the same obsession that now gripped Eleanor. The last expedition they never returned, not a single one. Eleanor's gaze remained fixed on the tomb's entrance. She had spent her life chasing shadows, unraveling the stories of those whom history had tried to silence. This was no mere discovery, it was a reckoning. The air around her seemed to thicken, heavy with the weight of centuries and the whispers of something unseen. "Certainty is a luxury we don't have," she replied, her voice steady but edged with resolve. "But turning back now would be a betrayal of everything we've worked for." Amir hesitated, his unease palpable. Yet he said nothing more as Eleanor took a deliberate step forward, crossing the threshold into the waiting darkness. The tomb exhaled a breath of stale, ancient air, as if it had been holding it for millennia. Somewhere deep within, something stirred, and the desert, ever watchful, held its breath. Chapter 1: The Forgotten Pharaoh. The Missing Dynasty. The 18th dynasty of Egypt's New Kingdom stands as a beacon of power and grandeur, its legacy illuminated by the likes of Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, and the enigmatic Akhenaten. Yet, between the reigns of Amenhotep III and his revolutionary son, Akhenaten, lies a void, a mysterious decade scholars have dubbed the Veiled Interval. Official records from this time are eerily sparse, as if the era itself had been deliberately erased. The only trace of its existence is a name whispered in fragmented texts: Nebkowar, a pharaoh who ruled briefly before being consumed by the sands. For Eleanor, Nebkowar was more than a historical footnote. He was an obsession. It began during her graduate studies in the dimly lit halls of the Cairo Museum, where she encountered a shattered stele. Its inscription, though fragmented, spoke of a king who walked with demons and drank from the cup of chaos. The words ignited something in her, a hunger to unravel the truth. Over the years, she pieced together fragments of papyri, deciphered cryptic tomb reliefs, and followed the faintest trails of evidence. What emerged was a chilling portrait of a ruler who had dared to defy the natural order. Nebkowar, it seemed, had been no ordinary pharaoh. He was a heretic, a man who had turned to Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and destruction, in a desperate bid to conquer death itself. His reign, shrouded in secrecy and fear, hinted at rituals too dark to be recorded and ambitions too dangerous to be remembered. And now, standing at the entrance to a tomb that had lain hidden for millennia, Eleanor felt the weight of that obsession bearing down on her. The desert had guarded Nebkar's secrets for centuries. But tonight, the sands were shifting. The tomb's discovery. In 2023, a violent sandstorm near the Dakla oasis tore through the desert, revealing what centuries of shifting sands had concealed. A limestone staircase descending 30 feet into the earth. Satellite scans soon unveiled a structure that defied convention. A sprawling, labyrinthine complex with 7 sealed chambers. Unlike the celestial alignments of royal tombs, this one was oriented toward the constellations of the underworld, as if beckoning the dead. Above the entrance, the symbol of the Shen ring, eternity, was carved into the stone, but inverted, a deliberate defiance of Mat, the sacred balance of the cosmos. Lenore's team, bankrolled by a reclusive and controversial tech billionaire, had spent months painstakingly excavating the site. Now, as she descended the ancient staircase, the air grew thick and oppressive, as though the tomb itself resisted intrusion. The walls were alive with bas-reliefs, but these were no ordinary depictions of divine offerings or triumphant resurrections. Instead, they told a darker tale. Priests with jackal heads. Not the familiar visage of Anubis, but something distorted, unnatural, pouring streams of blood into alabaster chalices. Mummified figures twisted in silent agony, their forms frozen in eternal torment. And at the heart of it all, a throne room where a pharaoh sat cloaked in shadow, his face hidden behind a mask of lapis lazuli. It's cold. Blue sheen glinting faintly in the dim light. Each step deeper into the tomb felt like a descent into madness, the weight of the unknown pressing down on Eleanor's shoulders. The walls seemed to whisper, the air to hum with a low, almost imperceptible vibration. She could not shake the feeling that the tomb was not merely a resting place for the dead. It was a prison, a sanctuary, or perhaps a warning. And as her headlamp flickered over the grotesque carvings, she wondered if they had unearthed a secret meant to stay buried. Chapter 2. The Descent. Chamber of Shadows. The first chamber was a tomb within a tomb, its air thick with the stench of decay, though nothing organic had survived the ages. The floor was a mosaic of shattered pottery and the bleached bones of animals. Jackals, their skulls arranged in a deliberate spiraling pattern that seemed to pull the eye toward its center. Amir crouched beside a clay tablet, his gloved hands trembling as he brushed away the dust. "It's a funerary text," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but it's wrong. The spells are written in reverse, as if they're meant to unravel the journey to the afterlife, not guide it." He traced a line with his finger, words etched in jagged hieroglyphs. "Let the soul be bound, let the flesh be preserved, let the heart be weighed against the feather of chaos." Eleanor felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. In the traditional rites, the heart was judged by Osiris, weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the symbol of truth and order. A balanced scale meant eternal paradise. But here, the feather was gone, replaced by the coiled form of a serpent. Apep, the eternal enemy of Ra, the embodiment of chaos and destruction. The chamber seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing closer with every breath. The jackal skulls stared blankly, their hollow eyes accusing. She could almost hear the whispers of the priests who had performed these twisted rites, their voices echoing through the centuries. This was no ordinary tomb. It was a place of inversion where the sacred had been defiled and the natural order appended. And somewhere deeper within the labyrinth, she knew, lay the source of this corruption. The Guardian's Price. A narrow, claustrophobic corridor led them to a towering stone door, its surface etched with a dire warning in 7 ancient languages: Greek, Demotic, and others long forgotten. The message was clear: disturb the sleeper and the Eater of Souls will feast. The words seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light, as if alive with malice. Sophia, the team's engineer, swept her laser scanner over the door, searching for traps. What she found was unnervingly simple. A pressure plate concealed beneath a mosaic of Sekhmet. The lion-headed goddess, her eyes glaring as if in warning. Before anyone could react, Amir's foot brushed the plate. The door groaned, its ancient mechanisms grinding to life, and with a deafening rumble, it began to slide open. But the sound of stone against stone was quickly drowned out by a thunderous crash behind them. The corridor they had just passed through collapsed, sealing their exit in a cloud of dust and debris. Panic erupted. Sophia's voice trembled as she radioed the surface, her words breaking into fragments. "We're the corridor. Its static," hissed back, cold and unyielding. The team was cut off, buried deep within the tomb. Eleanor clenched her fists, forcing her breath to steady. There was no time for fear. The air was thick with dust and desperation, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. There was no turning back. The only way was forward. Chapter 3. The Halls of Torment. The Well of Souls. The second chamber yawned before them, a vast circular abyss that seemed to swallow the light. Its walls were honeycombed with niches, each cradling an obsidian jar that glinted faintly in the beam of their headlamps. Inside the jars floated human hearts, suspended in a viscous ink-black liquid that shimmered with an unnatural sheen. Above them, hieroglyphs carved into the stone declared, "These are the hearts of those who doubted the king's divinity." Eleanor's voice was barely audible, a whisper swallowed by the oppressive silence. "This isn't a tomb," she said. "It's a prison." Amir, his hands unsteady, opened the weathered journal of Sir Reginald Hargrave, the 19th century explorer who had vanished while pursuing this very discovery. The final entry was scrawled in a frantic hand. "The hearts beat. They beat, and in their rhythm I hear her voice, the Lady of Slaughter, calling my name." The words stopped abruptly, the next page marred by a dark, rust-colored stain. Blood, the air grew colder. Heavier, as if the chamber itself were alive, watching, waiting. Eleanor's gaze lingered on the obsidian jars, their contents pulsating faintly as though the hearts within still clung to some semblance of life. She could almost hear it, a low rhythmic thrum, like a drumbeat echoing from the depths of the earth. And then, faint but unmistakable, came a sound that made her blood run cold. A whisper, soft and insidious, threading through the silence. The offering hall. The third chamber was a grotesque distortion of everything a tomb was meant to be, where offerings of food and treasure should have adorned the walls. There were instead rows of mummified corpses, their mouths stitched shut with golden thread, as if to silence them for eternity. The air was thick with the scent of ancient decay, and the flickering light of their headlamps cast long, wavering shadows that seemed to ride like restless spirits. At the center of the chamber stood an altar, its surface marred by a dark, rust-colored stain that no amount of time could fully erase. Above it loomed a mural, its colors unnervingly vivid despite the centuries. It depicted Nebkowr, his eyes glowing with an unnatural gold, gripping a dagger to the throat of a bound figure labeled the Unfaithful One. The scene radiated cruelty, a stark contrast to the reverence typically shown in royal tombs. Sophia, ever the pragmatist, stared at the macabre display, her usual skepticism replaced by a growing unease. "This isn't right," she murmured, her voice uncharacteristically shaky. "Tombs are supposed to honor the dead. This is punishment." Eleanor nodded, her mind racing. This was no resting place for a pharaoh seeking eternal peace. Nebkowr hadn't been preparing for the afterlife. He'd been preparing for war. But against whom? The gods themselves, his own people. The weight of the question hung heavy in the air, unanswered and ominous. As she stepped closer to the altar, the golden threads glinting in the light, she couldn't shake the feeling that the chamber was alive, watching, waiting. And somewhere, deep within the labyrinth, something stirred. Chapter 4. The Chamber of Revelations. The Pharaoh's Secret. The fourth chamber held a library of papyrus scrolls, their contents preserved by the dry air. Eleanor's hands shook as she unrolled one. It detailed Nebkar's rise. A younger son of Amenhotep III, he'd been excluded from the line of succession. But after a plague decimated the royal family, he seized power, claiming the gods had chosen him to purge Egypt of weakness. His obsession with immortality led him to Sekhmet's cult. In exchange for power, he made sacrifices. First animals, then criminals, then nobles who opposed him. The final scroll described a ritual to bind the Ka to the body beyond death, requiring a vessel of pure blood to house his spirit, the royal burial. The fifth chamber was a burial vault, but the sarcophagus was empty. Instead, a life-size statue of Nebkar stood atop a dais, its eyes inlaid with obsidian. The walls told a chilling story. After the ritual failed, priests betrayed Nebkar, burying him alive in a secret chamber. But before dying, he cursed his lineage, vowing to return when the stars hunger and the blood of the innocent flows. Amir found a hidden passage behind the statue, fled downward into darkness. Chapter 5. The Heart of Darkness. The True Tomb. The final chamber was small, claustrophobic. The walls pulsed with a faint crimson glow emanating from a massive crystal embedded in the ceiling. Below it lay a stone table, and on it, mummified figure wrapped in linen stained with gold. Nebkar, but something was wrong. The mummy's wrappings were moving, as if breathing. The crystal's light intensified as Eleanor approached, casting distorted shadows that seemed to writhe like serpents. She felt a presence, a cold intelligence probing her mind. Then the visions began. Chapter 6. The Curse Unleashed. Nebkar's Revenge. In the visions, Eleanor witnessed Nebkar's final moments. Buried alive, he'd used the crystal's power to transfer his consciousness into the statue. For centuries, he'd manipulated explorers to uncover his tomb, hoping to possess a living body. The 19th century team, the animal sacrifices, the hearts in jars, all were attempts to fuel his resurrection. Now Eleanor was his chosen vessel. The crystal's light seared her skin, and she heard his voice, ancient and hungry. Asterisk, you have freed me, little one. Now we become one. Amir tried to pull her away, but the shadows came alive, coalescing into a monstrous form, a hybrid of jackal and serpent, with Nebkar's face. The others fled, but Eleanor stood frozen, the curse wrapping around her soul like chains. Chapter 7. The Final Ritual. The Choice. In a flash of insight, Eleanor remembered the journal's final pages. Hargrave had written of a counter-ritual hidden in the tomb's design. She grabbed a dagger from the offering hall and sliced her palm, letting her blood drip onto the crystal. The visions shifted. She saw herself as Nebkar's priestess, an ancient betrayal, a sacrifice to Sekhmet. The curse needed her consent. With a scream, she plunged the dagger into the mummy's chest. The crystals shattered, releasing a deafening roar. The chamber collapsed as the shadow beast dissolved, Nebkar's scream echoing into silence. Epilogue. The sands remember. Eleanor awoke at dawn, her body broken but alive. The tomb was gone, swallowed by the sands as if it had never existed. Amir found her hours later, delirious and clutching the obsidian dagger. Back in Cairo, she burned Hargrave's journal and sealed her research in a vault. Some secrets, she realized, were never meant to be uncovered. But in her dreams, she still hears the whispers, the desert, waiting for the next fool to disturb its dead. The darkness remembers. It watches. It waits. If you felt the chill of an ancient gaze tonight, good. You're closer to the truth than you realize. What do you think of this video? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore more mysteries with us.